Chicago. A city built on steel, sweat, and guys who asked very uncomfortable questions. Back in the day, if somebody owed money, skipped out on a debt, or suddenly forgot how to speak English when the boss asked a question, well, let's just say the Chicago outfit had a system. Now you can bring a little of that legendary problem-solving power into your own home. Introducing the Chicago Outfit Truth Extraction Kit. That's right. For the low price of 3 easy payments of $19.29, because around here we respect tradition, you'll receive everything you need to turn any awkward conversation into a full confession. Inside every kit you'll find the Cicero Conversation Chair. Comfortable, sturdy, and positioned directly under the bright light of truth. The Deluxe Rubber Hose. Perfect for encouraging honesty at family poker games. And of course, the Chicago Outfit Ledger Notebook. Because when somebody says they'll pay you tomorrow, you write that down. But wait, there's more. Order now and we'll include the emergency alibi generator. Just spin the wheel and instantly receive a classic Chicago excuse like, I was at church. I was with my cousin Tony. I never even heard of that guy. Or the all-time favorite. What murder? Thousands of satisfied customers are already talking. Mostly because the kit works. So the next time someone tells you, I swear, I don't know nothing, just smile, lean in close. And remember what Chicago taught us all. Everybody talks eventually. The Chicago Outfit Truth Extraction Kit. Available now. Exclusively from Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions. Because sometimes you gotta solve problems. Chicago style. Viewer discretion is advised. This documentary is presented for commentary, historical discussion, satire, criticism, education, entertainment, and artistic storytelling purposes only. The material discussed throughout this video involves organized crime history, public figures, conspiracy theories, internet culture, media narratives, historical allegations, and dramatized interpretations of real-world events. Certain scenes, dialogue, and comedic segments are intentionally exaggerated, sarcastic, stylized, or speculative in nature as part of the Pizzaverse presentation style. This production does not claim to possess secret evidence regarding the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, the operations of organized crime families, hidden union conspiracies, buried treasure, cryptocurrency scams, haunted parking lots, or some guy named Vinny allegedly knowing a guy who knew a guy. Any references to criminal activity are based on publicly reported information, historical accounts, court records, journalistic sources, cultural folklore, or widely circulated theories that have existed in public discussion for decades. No statement in this documentary should be interpreted as a formal accusation against any living individual, organization, union, restaurant, trucking company, casino operator, retired wise guy, internet personality, emotionally unstable podcast host, or suspiciously confident YouTube commenter with an eagle profile picture. The parody advertisements featured throughout this program are fictional comedic segments created for satire and entertainment purposes only. Hoffa coin does not exist. Probably. The creators of this documentary strongly advise against investing retirement savings into conspiracy theories, trusting random men in parking lots, joining fake internet unions, burying evidence beneath sports stadiums, or taking legal advice from live stream chat rooms after midnight. The views expressed by the narrator are presented in a comedic and theatrical storytelling format, inspired by classic noir documentaries, old-school crime narration, internet satire, and exaggerated Long Island-style commentary. This documentary also contains strong language, dark humor, historical violence, discussions of organized crime, labor corruption, federal investigations, existential despair, and enough paranoia to make your uncle start pointing at maps during Thanksgiving dinner. Frankly, if you clicked on a documentary called Jimmy Hoffa, the Internet, and the Greatest Disappearing Act in American History, and expected a calm educational PowerPoint narrated by a substitute teacher named Carl, you may already be in the wrong building. The producers would also like to formally acknowledge that the internet has permanently destroyed everybody's attention span. Everybody suddenly thinks they're a detective, and half the country now believes blurry thumbnails with red arrows are research. Please enjoy responsibly. Thank you for supporting independent storytelling, satire, commentary, and cinematic internet chaos. Let's get into it.
Jimmy Hoffa, the Internet, and the Greatest Disappearing Act in American History. Produced by Pizzaverse Studios, in association with Palermo Productions, written by Bambi Palermo, narrated by Vincent DiPrio, directed somewhere between Detroit, Vegas, YouTube, and a diner nobody wants to talk about anymore. Historical research, public records, archived reports, conspiracy forums at 3 a.m., union history, organized crime investigations, and emotionally unstable internet detectives. Additional research assistants, old newspaper archives, questionable parking lot theories, men named Sal, the comments section, a guy who swears his uncle knew something, cinematic reconstruction team, 3 cups of espresso, 2 broken office chairs, a conspiracy wall held together with tape and bad decisions. Jimmy Hoffa didn't just disappear. He was erased. Not by ghosts. Not by aliens. Not by one lone hitman hiding behind a dumpster with a pistol and a dream. No. Jimmy Hoffa vanished because America in the 1970s was a pressure cooker full of corrupt unions, mob money, federal panic, dirty politicians, construction empires, Vegas cash, and men who solved problems by making people disappear forever. And guys, the deeper you dig into Hoffa's disappearance, the weirder this entire thing gets. Because this isn't just a mob story anymore. Now it's internet folklore, conspiracy channels, TikTok detectives, YouTuber experts, fake witnesses, secret maps, buried rumors, dead informants, 1,000 different stories. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa might be the most commercially successful missing person in American history. Everybody's got a theory. And somehow every theory sounds insane until you remember who these people actually were. These were not civilized businessmen. These were old-school power brokers connected to organized crime, labor racketeering, casinos, trucking monopolies, and millions upon millions of dollars moving through the shadows of post-war America. This wasn't social media drama. This was the real thing. And somewhere inside all that chaos, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared forever. The man who controlled America's roads. Before Jimmy Hoffa became America's most famous missing person, he became one of the most powerful men in the United States. And modern audiences honestly forget what unions used to mean in this country. This wasn't some office HR dispute over coffee machines and passive-aggressive emails. This was industrial America. Factories roaring 24 hours a day. Steel plants. Shipping hubs. Construction empires. Railroads. Warehouses. Entire cities functioning because millions of workers kept the machine moving. And every single piece of that machine depended on transportation. Trucks. That's the key. You controlled trucking in mid-century America? Guys, you controlled everything. Food. Medicine. Electronics. Alcohol. Construction materials. Furniture. Department stores. Vegas casinos. Military supply chains. Everything moved through roads. And Jimmy Hoffa understood that before most politicians even realized what was happening. That's what made him dangerous. The guy wasn't just a union boss. He was an operator. Aggressive. Calculating. Charismatic. Cold when he needed to be. People who met Hoffa described him like a force of nature. He wasn't physically huge. He wasn't some movie monster gangster screaming every 5 seconds. That's Hollywood nonsense. The real dangerous guys usually talk calmly. And Hoffa knew how to talk. He could walk into a union hall full of exhausted truckers making terrible wages and convince them he was the only man in America willing to fight for them. Then he could walk into a smoke-filled back room with businessmen and organized crime figures and negotiate like a battlefield general. That's rare. Most people only know how to operate in one world. Hoffa moved through all of them. The workers trusted him because he delivered results. The mob respected him because he understood leverage. Politicians feared him because he could influence massive labor blocks during elections. That's real power. Not internet power. Not fake influencer power. Actual national power. And once somebody reaches that level, the line between labor leader, businessman, political player, and underworld figure starts getting blurry real fast. That's where the mythology begins. Because Jimmy Hoffa became something America simultaneously admired and feared. To working-class Americans, he was the guy standing up to giant corporations. To federal investigators, he was corruption wrapped in patriotism. To organized crime, he was useful. Very useful. And in the underworld, usefulness is the closest thing there is to friendship, until it isn't. The mob, Vegas, and the money machine. Now, this is the part they usually soften up in documentaries, because once you start talking about money, the whole fairy tale of clean American capitalism starts wobbling sideways. Because Vegas didn't rise from the desert through pure entrepreneurial spirit and motivational speeches. That city exploded because enormous amounts of money were moving through systems nobody wanted examined too closely. And one of the biggest financial engines in that world. Union pension money. Especially Teamster pension money. Now imagine being ordinary workers across America. You're driving trucks. Breaking your back. Working insane hours. Your pension funds are supposed to represent security, retirement, stability. Instead, those funds start moving into massive casino developments, construction projects, hotel operations, and high-level financial arrangements involving people who absolutely did not wear name tags at networking conferences. This is where organized crime becomes less about street violence and more about infrastructure. That's the part people don't understand. The mob wasn't powerful just because of violence. Violence was enforcement. The real power came from access. Access to unions. Access to politicians. Access to loans. Access to shipping. Access to gambling money. Access to labor contracts. And Jimmy Hoffa sat near the center of all of it. That's what made him both valuable and terrifying. Because once a man understands where all the money is flowing, he becomes incredibly hard to control. And guys, money changes everybody. Politicians suddenly stop asking questions. Businessmen suddenly discover flexibility. Federal pressure appears and disappears mysteriously. People who were enemies become allies overnight. That's America, not the Disney version. The real version. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos sat Las Vegas, a glittering desert monument built partly on labor, corruption, ambition, greed, and enough hidden cash to choke a horse. That city became the American dream wearing a fake mustache. And Hoffa knew exactly how the machine worked. That made him indispensable. But it also made him dangerous. Because powerful systems love useful people. Right up until the moment those people stop behaving predictably. Prison changed everything. Here's the thing about power. People think it waits for them. It doesn't. The minute you lose control, the world starts rearranging itself without you. And Jimmy Hoffa learned that lesson the hard way. By the time he landed in prison during the 1960s, the pressure around him had become enormous. Federal investigators wanted him destroyed. The Kennedy administration especially viewed him as public enemy number one. Robert Kennedy went after Hoffa like a man possessed. These two hated each other. Not politically. Personally. And honestly, their rivalry feels less like government history and more like two alpha personalities locked in an endless cage fight. Because Hoffa represented something terrifying to Washington. A man outside traditional political systems who still wielded enormous influence. That scares governments. Especially when organized crime allegations start circling around that influence. So Hoffa goes away. And while he's sitting in prison, everything changes. New alliances form. New owners rise. New power structures stabilize. People adapt. That's survival. And when Hoffa eventually got out, he expected to walk back into the same world he left behind. Huge mistake. Because prison freezes time psychologically. The outside world keeps moving while you're mentally stuck in the moment you left. Hoffa still saw himself as the central figure. The king. But organized crime doesn't work like fairy tales. There's no magical restoration ceremony where everybody waits patiently for the boss to come home. The machine keeps moving. And some people allegedly had zero interest in Hoffa reclaiming influence. Especially if he started making noise. Especially if he threatened to expose things. Especially if old loyalties started becoming dangerous liabilities. That's the key. By the mid-1970s, Jimmy Hoffa wasn't just a former union leader. He was potentially a destabilizing force walking around with decades of institutional knowledge. And historically speaking, that tends to shorten life expectancy considerably. The meeting. July 30th, 1975. One of the most famous days in organized crime history. And the reason this story never dies is because the details feel almost cinematic. Too cinematic. Jimmy Hoffa leaves his house expecting a meeting. A sit-down. Supposedly involving organized crime-connected figures. The location? The Marcus Red Fox restaurant outside Detroit. Now already this sounds like a movie. A suburban restaurant meeting tied to underworld politics, labor disputes, and national corruption. Sweetheart, America manufactures mythology better than Hollywood does. And then comes the strangest part. Nobody can fully agree on what happened next. Some witnesses say Hoffa appeared angry. Others say calm. Some say he waited outside. Others say he entered a car. Then suddenly, nothing. Gone. No body recovered. No confirmed murder weapon. No universally accepted crime scene. No definitive explanation. Just endless theories. Buried beneath concrete. Ground into industrial waste. Cremated. Hidden in construction sites. Buried under stadiums. Dumped in lakes. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa has been allegedly buried in enough locations to qualify for a national park tour. And that mystery became gasoline for American imagination. Because unresolved stories never die. They evolve. Every decade adds new rumors. Every generation invents new suspects. And the media absolutely feasted on it. Because Jimmy Hoffa disappearing wasn't just a crime story anymore. It became American folklore. The kind grandparents talk about like urban legends. The mob got him. The government knew. Everybody covered it up. And maybe the scariest part. Some version of all those statements might contain truth. That's why the story survives. Because uncertainty is immortal. And America loves immortality more than answers. The fake witnesses. This part of the story is honestly incredible. Every couple years, some new guy appears claiming he knows exactly what happened to Hoffa. And every single one of these stories sounds like it came from a man who drank 6 espressos and stared at a conspiracy board for 19 straight hours. My uncle buried him. My grandfather drove the car. My cousin worked sanitation and heard the truth. A retired guy in Jersey told me everything. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa has allegedly been buried under stadiums, parking lots, bridges, swimming pools, warehouses, horse farms, and probably somebody's Olive Garden patio. The man's got more alleged burial sites than Elvis has sightings. And yet people keep believing it. Why? Because America loves folklore, especially criminal folklore. The outlaw story is baked into this country. Gangsters become legends. Bootleggers become folk heroes. And mysteries become national obsessions. That's why every fake witness gets attention. The media doesn't want closure. Closure kills business. Mystery sells forever. And honestly, some of these witnesses clearly just wanted attention. You'll see these interviews where some 80-year-old guy suddenly claims, "Yeah, I was there." Dumped in lakes. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa has been allegedly buried in enough locations to qualify for a national park tour. And that mystery became gasoline for American imagination. Because unresolved stories never die. They evolve. Every decade adds new rumors. Every generation invents new suspects. And the media absolutely feasted on it. Because Jimmy Hoffa disappearing wasn't just a crime story anymore. It became American folklore. The kind grandparents talk about like urban legends. The mob got him. The government knew. Everybody covered it up. And maybe the scariest part? Some version of all those statements might contain truth. That's why the story survives. Because uncertainty is immortal. And America loves immortality more than answers. The internet turns Hoffa into content. Now here's where the entire story mutates into something almost surreal. Because Jimmy Hoffa stopped being just a historical figure. He became internet property. And honestly, that may be the strangest evolution of all. Because the internet doesn't preserve history. It distorts it. Everything online eventually becomes a meme, a theory, a thumbnail, a monetized argument, or a guy yelling into a webcam at 2 in the morning. And Hoffa? Hoffa became the Mona Lisa of conspiracy content. Every few months, some new investigator appears online claiming they solved the mystery. Usually with blurry satellite images, a map covered in red arrows, screenshots from 1970s newspapers, and the confidence level of a man who just discovered caffeine for the first time. The internet loves unresolved mysteries. Because mysteries create engagement. Engagement creates clicks. Clicks create money. And suddenly Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance becomes less about history and more about digital entertainment. That's the modern world. Everybody's a detective now. Everybody's an expert. Everybody's got sources. Meanwhile, half these people can't find their car keys without filing a missing persons report. But online, everybody becomes Sherlock Holmes with Wi-Fi. And what's fascinating is how the internet transformed organized crime itself. Back in the day, people feared these guys. Now, people treat mobsters like collectible action figures. You got YouTube channels romanticizing violence, podcasts glorifying racketeering, TikTok edits with dramatic music over black and white crime photos. Everybody wants the aesthetic. Very few people understand the actual reality. Because the reality wasn't cinematic. It was ugly. People got beaten. Families got destroyed. Businesses got extorted. Witnesses disappeared. Workers got manipulated. Entire neighborhoods lived under pressure. But the internet cleans everything up, turns it into mythology, turns it into content. That's why Hoffa survived culturally, because unresolved stories are algorithmically immortal. Every generation rediscovers him, every platform reinvents him, and somewhere along the line, Jimmy Hoffa stopped being a missing union boss and became a permanent internet ghost. The fake witnesses. This part of the story is honestly incredible. Every couple years, some new guy appears claiming he knows exactly what happened to Hoffa. And every single one of these stories sounds like it came from a man who drank 6 espressos and stared at a conspiracy board for 19 straight hours. My uncle buried him. My grandfather drove the car. My cousin worked sanitation and heard the truth. A retired guy in Jersey told me everything. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa has allegedly been buried under stadiums, parking lots, bridges, swimming pools, warehouses, horse farms, and probably somebody's Olive Garden patio. The man's got more alleged burial sites than Elvis has sightings. And yet people keep believing it. Why? Because America loves folklore, especially criminal folklore. The outlaw story is baked into this country. Gangsters become legends. Bootleggers become folk heroes. And mysteries become national obsessions. That's why every fake witness gets attention. The media doesn't want closure. Closure kills business. Mystery sells forever. And honestly, some of these witnesses clearly just wanted attention. You'll see these interviews where some 80-year-old guy suddenly claims, "Yeah, I was there." Sir, you were 73 years old working at a bowling alley in Tampa. Relax. I think even Giacomo claimed he knows where Hoffa is. But because Hoffa disappeared so completely, the absence itself created opportunity. Everybody wants ownership of the mystery. Books, podcasts, documentaries, forums, interviews. Jimmy Hoffa became a cottage industry. And the longer the case stays unsolved, the more valuable the mythology becomes. That's the irony. The mystery itself became more profitable than the truth ever would have been. The real question nobody asks. Everybody always asks, who killed Hoffa? Wrong question. That's the movie version. The real question is, why did everybody seem so willing to move on afterward? Because that's where the story gets genuinely unsettling. Think about it. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't some random local businessman. This was one of the most powerful labor figures in American history. A nationally recognizable figure, a man with political influence, underworld connections, massive institutional knowledge, and decades of enemies. And yet once he vanished, the world adjusted surprisingly fast. The unions kept moving, the businesses kept operating, the political machine kept functioning. America shrugged and continued driving to work. That's terrifying, Because it reveals something deeply uncomfortable about large systems. They survive almost anything. Even the disappearance of major figures, especially if those figures become inconvenient. And guys, history is full of inconvenient people. Once somebody becomes dangerous to too many interests simultaneously, things get weird. Suddenly, investigations slow down, witnesses forget things, evidence disappears, people stop talking, everybody gets cautious. Fear spreads quietly. That's how real power operates, not loudly, quietly. And maybe that's why the Hoffa story still bothers people. Because deep down, Americans understand this wasn't just about one missing man. It was about a system. A gigantic interconnected machine involving unions, organized crime, corporations, politicians, law enforcement, and billions of dollars. Hoffa wasn't outside the machine. He was part of it, a very important part. And once he threatened the balance, the machine corrected itself. Or at least that's what the mythology suggests. And mythology matters, because eventually people stop remembering facts and start remembering feelings. Jimmy Hoffa became the feeling that powerful men can disappear and the world keeps spinning anyway. That's why the story survives. Not because of the body, because of the implication.
Hoffa coin. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Hoffa coin. The world's first cryptocurrency backed entirely by unresolved labor corruption and emotionally unstable conspiracy theories. Tired of investments you can actually track? Sick of financial transparency? Wish your retirement plan disappeared as efficiently as a union boss in 1975? Then Hoffa coin is for you. Features include invisible transactions, offshore confusion, witness protection level accounting, and a customer service department legally classified as missing. Every purchase comes with one blurry aerial photograph, 3 contradictory witness statements, and a man named Tony insisting, "I know what really happened." No, he doesn't. Nobody does. That's the beauty of Hoffa coin. Because unlike traditional currencies, this one vanishes before the FBI even finishes the paperwork. Hoffa coin, now you see your money, now you don't. Not available in all states, especially Nevada or New Jersey or the internet after midnight.
The media builds a ghost. The media didn't just report Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. They transformed it into an American religion. And honestly, you can track the evolution of modern true crime obsession directly through this case. Because before Hoffa vanished, organized crime stories mostly lived in newspapers and whispered conversations. After Hoffa, everything changed. Suddenly, America realized something terrifying. A man could be nationally famous, massively connected, under constant federal scrutiny, and still disappear completely. That scared people. But it also fascinated them. And fear mixed with fascination is ratings gold. News stations ran endless speculation. Talk shows debated theories non-stop. Every retired cop suddenly had inside information. Every reporter had anonymous sources. Every guy sitting at a diner counter in New Jersey somehow knew a guy. And over time, the story became less about evidence and more about atmosphere. That's important, because atmosphere is how myths survive. Facts get forgotten. Feelings don't. And the feeling surrounding Hoffa was simple. Something bigger happened here. Something hidden. something protected. That's why the story never dies. Because Americans instinctively distrust systems while simultaneously worshiping them. We believe powerful institutions run everything. But we also believe those institutions are constantly lying. That contradiction fuels half the country. And Hoffa became the perfect symbol for it. He represented corruption. But he also represented rebellion. Workers loved him. The government hated him. The mob used him. The media mythologized him. And eventually, America commercialized him. That's the final stage of all modern mythology. Commercialization. Books. TV specials. Streaming documentaries. Conspiracy podcasts. Merchandise. TikTok clips. Thumbnail guys pointing at parking lots like they discovered Atlantis. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance probably generated more content than some presidential administrations. And somewhere along the way, the actual human being disappeared underneath the legend. The men around Hoffa. One thing that gets overlooked constantly in these documentaries is the ecosystem around Hoffa. Because powerful men never operate alone, especially not in organized crime-adjacent environments. There were lawyers, union officials, political allies, fixers, middlemen, businessmen, mob associates, federal investigators, drivers, messengers, entire networks of people orbiting this thing. And that's why the case becomes almost impossible to untangle. Too many interests overlap. Too many people benefited from silence. Too many individuals only knew tiny fragments of the larger picture. That's how sophisticated systems protect themselves. Compartmentalization. One guy knows transportation. Another knows money. Another handles communication. Another handles enforcement. Nobody sees the whole machine except maybe a handful of people at the very top. And Hoffa? He probably saw more of the machine than most. That's what made him uniquely dangerous. Because eventually information itself becomes leverage. That's true in politics. It's true in business. It's true in organized crime. And it's definitely true on the internet now. Half the modern economy is basically people weaponizing information against each other with ring lights and microphones. Different decade. Same behavior. And when you study the people surrounding Hoffa near the end of his life, one thing becomes obvious. Everybody was nervous. Federal pressure was intense. Organized crime families were evolving. The old systems were changing. Vegas was changing. America itself was changing. The post-war era was ending. And Hoffa? He belonged to the old world. A world where influence happened face-to-face in restaurants, union halls, back rooms, and private meetings. Not through apps. Not through corporations pretending to be your friend on social media. The old world operated differently. More directly. More brutally. And by 1975, that world was starting to cannibalize itself. The parking lot becomes a shrine. This part is honestly incredible if you step back and think about it. The Marcus Red Fox parking lot became one of the most famous parking lots in American history. That's insane. Imagine explaining this to somebody in another country. Yeah, we turned a suburban restaurant disappearance into a 50-year national obsession. Only America could do that. And over time, the location itself transformed from a possible crime scene into something almost spiritual. People visit it, photograph it, analyze it, reconstruct timelines obsessively. The parking lot became sacred conspiracy ground. That's what humans do with unresolved trauma. We build shrines around uncertainty, and the internet supercharged that instinct. Now everybody studies vehicle positions, witness statements, weather reports, timestamps, phone calls, and old maps like they're decoding ancient scripture. Guys, there are probably people on Reddit right now writing a 14,000-word theory connecting Hoffa's disappearance to lunar cycles and union accounting errors. And somehow, that still wouldn't be the weirdest thing online this week. But this obsession reveals something important. People desperately want closure. Not just for Hoffa. For everything. That's why conspiracy theories spread so aggressively online. Because uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. And unresolved mysteries create psychological itchiness. People need answers. Even fake ones. Especially fake ones. Because fake answers often feel emotionally satisfying. Real life usually doesn't. Real life is messy, confusing, incomplete. And Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance may be one of the purest examples of that in modern American history. No ending. No confession. No final scene. Just absence. And honestly, that might be why the story remains so powerful. Because absence forces imagination to fill the void. The American machine. Here's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. Jimmy Hoffa wasn't an exception. He was a product. A product of post-war America. A country exploding economically while corruption spread through nearly every major institution imaginable. Politics. Construction. Labor. Entertainment. Law enforcement. Gambling. Business. Everybody was connected somehow. That's the dirty little secret of 20th century America. The lines between legitimate power and illegitimate power were often paper-thin. And Hoffa existed right in the middle of that overlap. That's why his disappearance still resonates. Because deep down, people understand the story isn't just about organized crime. It's about America itself. The ambition. The greed. The hustle. The corruption. The myth-making. Jimmy Hoffa became the ultimate symbol of the American contradiction. A man who fought for workers while allegedly operating alongside criminals. A public figure who lived in the shadows. A patriot accused of corruption. A labor icon feared by presidents. That complexity makes him immortal historically. And then the internet came along and made everything even stranger. Now every mystery becomes entertainment. Every scandal becomes content. Every disappearance becomes a thumbnail. That's modern civilization. We don't process history anymore. We stream it. We meme it. We argue about it at 3 in the morning while eating cold pizza and pretending YouTube comments count as archival research. Beautiful system we built here. Absolute maniacs. And somehow Jimmy Hoffa still sits at the center of all of it. Half man, half myth, half algorithm. Which mathematically makes no sense. But neither does America. The conspiracy economy. At some point, Jimmy Hoffa stopped being a missing person and became an industry. That's the weirdest part of all this. Entire careers have been built around this disappearance. Books, TV specials, podcasts, lecture tours, streaming documentaries, conspiracy channels with dramatic thumbnails showing arrows pointed at random dirt piles. Everybody profits from uncertainty. And honestly, that's not unique to Hoffa. That's modern media in general. The internet discovered something terrifying. Fear, mystery, and outrage are infinitely renewable resources. You never run out. Solve the mystery. Business dies. Keep the mystery alive. Congratulations. You got content forever. That's why conspiracy culture exploded online. Because conspiracy theories function like entertainment franchises now. Every new clue becomes a sequel. Every blurry photograph becomes evidence. Every retired guy from Detroit with a suspicious story becomes a featured guest on somebody's podcast, recorded in a room lit entirely by neon signs and emotional instability. And sweetheart, people eat it up. Because deep down, people want to believe there's hidden truth behind everything. That life isn't random. That powerful forces secretly control events. Sometimes that instinct is understandable. History contains real corruption. Real conspiracies. Real cover-ups. That's true. But the internet took that instinct and turned it into a casino. Now everybody's gambling on narratives. And Hoffa became one of the highest performing stocks in the conspiracy economy. The story has everything. Unions. Organized crime. Federal investigations. Secret meetings. Possible betrayals. Missing evidence. And no body. That's catnip for the modern internet. You couldn't design a better algorithmic mystery if you tried. Why America romanticizes the mob. This is where people get uncomfortable. Because Americans have a bizarre relationship with organized crime. We condemn it publicly, while romanticizing it culturally. That contradiction has existed for generations. Movies turned mobsters into anti-heroes. Television turned them into philosophers with anger issues. The internet turned them into aesthetic content. Everybody loves the image, the suits, the cigars, the restaurants, the old school respect talk, the dramatic music. But very few people talk honestly about the actual damage. Extortion, fear, violence, corruption, destroyed businesses, ruined families. The real underworld wasn't cinematic. It was pressure. Constant pressure. And Jimmy Hoffa existed in a world where organized crime influence wasn't just rumor anymore. It was structural. That's the part history books sometimes avoid because it makes everybody look bad. Labor looked compromised. Politics looked compromised. Business looked compromised. Law enforcement looked compromised. Nobody walks away from this story clean. That's why Hoffa remains so culturally powerful. Because his story exposes something Americans hate admitting. Our systems were often held together by deals happening in back rooms. Not speeches. Not ideals. Deals. And the mob became symbolic of that hidden machinery. That's why people still obsess over these stories. Because organized crime represents a darker version of capitalism itself. Power, money, leverage, loyalty, fear. Just stripped of polite language. And honestly, sometimes the only difference between a boardroom and a criminal operation is whether the guy stealing from you wears a $4,000 suit or a tracksuit. The internet replaced the social club. Now here's where the story takes a strange modern turn. Back in Hoffa's era, information traveled through union halls, diners, social clubs, bars, private meetings, whispered conversations. That was the old network. Today, the internet replaced all of it. Now everybody sits online 24 hours a day performing identity for strangers. The old social club became live stream culture. The old rumor mill became comment sections. The old neighborhood gossip became viral clips. Different technology, same human behavior. People still crave belonging, status, validation, influence, and inside information. That never changes. Only the platforms change. And honestly, some modern live stream spaces function exactly like digital social clubs. You got alliances, betrayals, rivalries, loyalty tests, public humiliation rituals, reputation wars, and emotionally unstable guys yelling for 6 straight hours into microphones. Human civilization evolving beautifully. Absolutely magnificent. And the reason Hoffa fits perfectly into internet culture is because his story already operated like a rumor network long before social media existed. His disappearance spread through whispers. The internet simply industrialized the whispering. Now theories spread globally in seconds. And once misinformation enters the machine, forget it. It multiplies forever. That's why the Hoffa mystery will probably never die now. Artificial intelligence will eventually start generating new theories automatically. Some college kid in 2043 will upload top 10 reasons Jimmy Hoffa's hiding under a base pro shop. And somehow it'll get 14 million views. Because mystery has become permanent entertainment infrastructure. The greatest disappearing act in American history. So after all these decades, what's the final truth? Honestly, we may never know. And that uncertainty is precisely what transformed Jimmy Hoffa into an American legend. Not because he disappeared, because nobody could fully explain it. That's the difference. History remembers unresolved stories longer than resolved ones. And Hoffa became the perfect unresolved story. A man powerful enough to scare presidents, connected enough to frighten investigators, embedded deeply enough within America's systems to understand how everything actually worked. Then suddenly, gone. No ending. No courtroom finale. No cinematic confession. Just silence. And eventually the silence itself became mythology. That's why Jimmy Hoffa survives culturally almost 50 years later. Not as a man. As an idea. The idea that enormous systems can erase people. The idea that truth can disappear. The idea that America itself operates partly through visible institutions and partly through invisible pressure. Whether that pressure came from organized crime, political corruption, economic influence, fear, or media manipulation. That's what people are really responding to when they obsess over Hoffa. Not the body. The implication. Because deep down people understand something uncomfortable. If a man that famous could disappear, what else happened that nobody ever fully uncovered? And that question is why the story never dies. The ghost that America created. Jimmy Hoffa became more than a labor leader. More than a criminal conspiracy. More than a cold case. America turned him into a ghost. A permanent shadow floating somewhere between history and entertainment. And maybe that's fitting. Because modern America itself exists somewhere between truth and performance now. Everything becomes content eventually. Politics. Crime. Corruption. Conspiracies. Disappearances. Nothing stays sacred for long. The algorithm consumes all of it. And somehow Hoffa survived the transition better than almost anybody. From union boss to crime figure to mystery to myth to internet folklore. That's immortality now. Not statues. Not history books. Engagement. Clicks. Endless discussion. And somewhere out there right now, some guy is still sitting at a diner counter insisting, "I know what really happened to Hoffa." No, you don't, Frank. Nobody does. That's why we're still talking about it. And honestly, we probably always will. And that's the thing about Jimmy Hoffa. The mystery stopped belonging to history a long time ago. Now it belongs to America itself. Every generation recreates the story in its own image. The newspapers turned it into scandal. Hollywood turned it into mythology. Cable television turned it into endless true crime programming. And the internet. The internet turned it into permanent digital folklore. Now the story never rests. There's always another theory, another witness, another blurry image, another podcast, another guy with dramatic music and a YouTube thumbnail screaming, "They finally found Hoffa." No, they didn't. Relax. At this point, Jimmy Hoffa has allegedly been buried under half of Detroit, 3 stadiums, 7 parking lots, 2 bridges, and probably a Buffalo Wild Wings somewhere in Jersey. The poor bastard's become America's most traveled missing person. But underneath all the jokes and conspiracy theories sits something darker. Because this story forces people to confront an uncomfortable reality. Powerful systems survive. No matter who disappears, no matter who falls, the machine keeps moving. That's true in politics. It's true in organized crime. It's true in media. And honestly, it's true on the internet too. Today, people disappear differently. Not physically, digitally. Buried under algorithms, buried under outrage cycles, buried under endless streams of disposable content. Everything moves fast now. Too fast. And maybe that's why stories like Hoffa still resonate. Because they remind people of an older America, an America of smoke-filled rooms, union halls, mob-controlled Vegas, late-night diner conversations, and secrets powerful men carried to the grave. A dirtier America. A more honest America in some ways. Because at least back then, the corruption didn't pretend to be wholesome. Now corporations post motivational tweets while harvesting your attention span like industrial farming equipment. Progress. Beautiful thing. And honestly, maybe Jimmy Hoffa surviving as a mystery is the only ending that ever made sense. A man tied to labor, to power, to corruption, to organized crime, to politics, to American ambition itself. Of course, the story couldn't end cleanly. America rarely does. The longer you study Hoffa, the more you realize this story was never really about finding a body. It was about trying to understand the system that produced him. That's the real rabbit hole. The overlap between labor, business, government, organized crime, and media mythology. That overlap shaped 20th century America. And in a lot of ways, it still shapes the modern world too. Only now the gangsters wear tech hoodies instead of pinky rings. The unions became algorithms. The social clubs became live streams. The pressure never disappeared. It just modernized. And guys, that may be the creepiest realization of all. If you enjoyed this documentary, welcome to the Pizzaverse, where history gets strange, the internet gets exposed, and every rabbit hole somehow leads to corruption, greed, hidden systems, or a guy named Tony trying to sell crypto out of the trunk of a Buick. Subscribe for long-form documentaries, conspiracy deep dives, mob history, internet insanity, parody commercials, cinematic storytelling, and enough late-night Jersey energy to make your FBI agent nervous. Because around here, we don't just tell stories. We dig up ghosts. And seriously, thank you for being here. The fact people still sit down and watch long documentaries in the middle of this dopamine-fried circus called the modern internet honestly means more than you know. You're keeping storytelling alive. Not corporate storytelling. Not sanitized storytelling. Real storytelling. The weird stories, the dark stories, the uncomfortable stories. The stories that make people argue in comment sections at 3 in the morning while somebody's uncle swears, "I'm telling ya Hoffa ain't dead." Sure, Anthony. And Elvis is driving the getaway car. Thank you for supporting Pizzaverse Studios. Thank you for supporting independent creators. And thank you for stepping into the madness with us one more time. See you at the next one. Jimmy Hoffa. The man who controlled America's trucks, terrified politicians, fought the Kennedys, allegedly knew everybody's secrets, and then somehow managed to become the world's most famous missing parking lot appointment. Robert F. Kennedy. Spent so much time chasing Hoffa, you'd think the Teamsters stole his lunch money personally. America watched two alpha males spend the 1960s trying to destroy each other professionally. Anthony Provenzano. The kind of guy who looked like he already knew where the body was before the meeting even started. Allegedly connected to Hoffa's disappearance so many times he basically became a recurring character in America's conspiracy universe. Frank Fitzsimmons. The guy who inherited Hoffa's throne while Hoffa was in prison. Basically the corporate "we've moved on" email in human form. Russell Bufalino. Soft-spoken, quiet, allegedly connected to half the mob mythology in American history. Proof that the calmest guy in the room is usually the one everybody should worry about. Jimmy, the Weasel, Fratiano. Mob informant, storyteller, human reminder that eventually everybody starts writing books once prison enters the chat. Mahus Red Fox, possibly the most famous restaurant parking lot in American history. One lunch meeting later, and the entire country spent 50 years staring at asphalt like it was the Zapruder film.
Giacomo Amato and Sons. Mystery Solving Starter Kit. When reality ain't dramatic enough, just make something up. America has questions. Questions science can't answer. Questions historians avoid. Questions no responsible adult should investigate after midnight with 3 espressos and a YouTube account. Questions like, who really buried Hoffa? Why does every mob story somehow involve a cousin named Sal? And most importantly, how did this become a 5-book series? That's where Giacomo Amato and Sons TM comes in. The #1 mystery-solving organization operating entirely out of diners, parking lots, and emotionally unstable Facebook comment sections. Our professionally untrained investigators specialize in vague mob stories, dramatic pointing at maps, suspicious storytelling, and turning absolutely nothing into a full-length documentary trilogy. Every mystery-solving starter kit TM comes fully loaded with 1 fake leather notebook, 3 unverifiable witness statements, a prepaid diner gift card, and an emergency phrase card that says, "I can't reveal my sources." That's right. Now you can investigate mysteries exactly like the professionals. Just follow our simple 4-step system. Step 1, find a blurry photograph. Step 2, circle random objects in red. Step 3, say something about this doesn't sit right with me. Step 4. Upload immediately.
Boom. You're now an internet detective. But wait. Order in the next 15 minutes and receive our bonus deluxe package. The official 1-star review defense kit. Featuring classic responses like, "You just didn't understand the story. The grammar mistakes were intentional. It's written that way for authenticity. The editor betrayed me." And for our premium customers, the deluxe You're in the book experience. That's right. We'll insert your name into a completely unnecessary chapter involving hidden tunnels, suspicious envelopes, union conspiracies, and a guy named Frankie the Neck who definitely heard things. You don't even need evidence anymore. That's the magic of modern storytelling. At Giacomo Amato and Sons, we believe if the facts don't fit the narrative, add more narrative. Giacomo Amato and Sons Mystery Solving Starter Kit. Because every parking lot deserves a conspiracy. Not recognized by historians, law enforcement, literary professionals, librarians, organized labor, or anyone capable of basic proofreading. Side effects may include paranoia, overconfidence, caffeine addiction, and aggressively whispering. The government knows. Pizza vs. Studios. Investigating mysteries nobody asked for.